Our paradigm can be that I can just jump into something that looks interesting and juicy and fun at any moment. Just switch it up, switch it up. So today we're going to talk about trauma. I have been meeting with individual women, for years, but recently more than in the past. And I keep coming across this repeating theme, and I'm going to call it trauma, although I'm not really sure that's the correct word. That's such a catch-all for things. But I wanted to speak to that today because I think that all of our lives include what I'm going to call this fragmentation of our soul, of our spirit. And trauma is one really strong way of that fragmentation happening. So I want to talk a little bit about how we might nurture the coming back together, the reclaiming of ourselves, and how we might even articulate what this looks like, because some of us don't even give language to it. We just feel in a little bit out of sorts. So you can't tell by looking at someone if they've experienced deep, light, pseudo trauma. We don't know. They call trauma, which I think is so interesting, it can be called the hidden wound or the silent scream. So we can be in a place of discord within ourselves and nobody else is even really tapping into that. Trauma is so subjective. Discord is subjective. There's not a line in the sand that says all things on this side are good and all things on this side are bad. There are obvious things that go into the trauma container, and they're not so obvious things, but there is a common denominator about times in our lives where things are more challenging that gives us an indication that we might need to step in and take care of ourselves in a different way. So most of us, probably many of us on this call, don't even identify ourselves as holding trauma, but most of us on this call are empaths. Many people on the spiritual path are empaths, and they feel a very deep resonance with other people's trauma or other people's dissidence or disassociation, or even communal, global. So if you're an empath, you are taking on and may have been taking on a lot of this energy, this fragmentation of our energy that's maybe not even yours, specifically yours alone. And so because we are more sensitive than the average, we also tend to take on things, and because they may not be the big ones that we know are traumas in life, we wouldn't identify them as such. We don't give credence to the whatever has happened in our lives. It's kind of like, well, that's normal. Everybody's got that. And yes, that's true. Everybody has a movement in their lives that contains things that are less than easy to deal with. That's true. And why does it matter if we label it as trauma, or why do we need to give a name to it? If it's creating dissidence in us, or a little disassociation, or a little hump or a hurdle, why aren't we handling that? Not saying it has to be something really traumatic. Otherwise, I just sweep it away. I just don't need to deal with this. I'm fine with it. Well, you may be fine, but you may be accumulating these little pieces, and they tire us out. They tire us out. We normalize experiences that we don't give a big enough name to. If it's a big loss, then we go, that's okay. It's a big loss. But it may be an accumulation of small things that are happening in your life that as a total, they're creating a dissidence in you or a disassociation. And it's not that any one of them is particularly evil or bad, but they're heavy for you. And they're causing us to break apart, to fragment. High levels of this, when it continues or exists over a longer period of time, change our physiology. So when people say, oh, well, you made yourself sick because you didn't make a change in your life around this thing. Well, that's not exactly the truth of it. But the truth is that our physiology and our energetics change when we're holding challenging situations. That is true. So by choice, some things we can step out of and some things we can't actually step out of. So it's not that I had a choice, but even if I did, it's my soul journey to take all of these different pieces and weave them together. So I don't blame myself that I'm ill because I didn't make a change or do something different. I say, this is a learning moment. I get to see this and say, I can do this differently going forward. Some of the areas physiologically that you might notice some accumulated discord are in brain function. This is so confusing because now they tell us when we get older, if we do this or we don't eat the right things, we might have fuzzy brain, hormones, age, all of these things that play into it. Also, what plays into it is carrying on situations and repeating them that are causing some discord in our system. Hormonal function can change. We can change our hormones based on how the experience we're having in the outside world. Lung and heart health specifically is related to this. So if you're having a lot of respiratory issues, you might ask, what else is going on energetically that I'm carrying that I don't need to carry? It might be just a straight physiological family situation, but it may also be that we're contributing in what we're carrying. So the mainstream definition of trauma is a psychological or an emotional response to an experience that is deeply distressing. And this includes our mind and our emotion, but it leaves out body energy. So the general therapeutic model looks at how, so you go to a counselor for several years to work on working out some trauma or situation you have, and they're working on your mind. How do I reset your mind? Most mainstream therapists aren't really working on your body, soul, energy level. They're not really talking about that. They're not even using the vernacular of that. But we know that any of these continuing experiences are also breaking down body, health, physiology, which we just spoke to, and the energy aspect. So from a spiritual perspective, when we're dealing with things that are traumatic or difficult or challenging or accumulative, it's body, mind, energy response to an experience that is deeply distressing. All three levels of our being are being drawn into this. The mind has you'll see it show up in the mind in fear, the looping of a story, the retelling of a story, distraction, the brain fuzz. Body, we know, we've talked about all the physiological responses. Energetically, on the quantum level, it's not things that we see. So this is where it gets a little more new agey. So then people say, well, I'm not really necessarily going to address this unless you're in the spiritual world that we're in and the words are more familiar. But our auras, our chakras, our meridians, this has been studied. Chakras and meridians and auras have been studied in ancient civilizations for thousands of years. It's not like it's some new thing, but how interesting we reintroduce it in the 60s. And all of a sudden now we're like, that's a new age thing. It's not a new age. It's an old age being brought into the age that we're in. So we need to also look at what is happening to us energetically. Trauma affects or discord affects the natural flow of our subtle energy force. It affects it. So what we want to do is to look at, how do I address this? So when we're in a situation or accumulative situations that are taking on this intense like taking over our whole system, we start to fragment our energy. And this happens because we're really smart. Our soul essence and the nature of us is really smart. When things get really tough, it knows how to numb us a little bit so that you can survive through it, whether it's physical or emotional or whatever it happens to be. We have survival mechanisms, but sometimes those mechanisms push things down to where we just then ignore it if we can get it pushed away long enough. But in the process of numbing this, we fragment our entirety a little bit. We're like throwing off little pieces of ourselves that got used in this numbing down. So we have to recall this. This is work that Lisa does. The calling back and soul retrieval is a very common practice in indigenous cultures, because they know that when you go through traumatic or difficult, challenging, upsetting situations, that the way that your system will handle it is that it will fragment a little bit. And they call them back. We say that often when we open. I'm calling all the pieces of myself back to me. It's something we say, but let's really think about that. What am I really trying to do when I say call all my pieces back? Where did I leave myself? Where am I? It's an intentional process of acknowledging that when I have to deal with life, it may be just life. It may be a week that was just full of life. And that was difficult enough that I had to fragment a little to handle it, because I had to still get up and go about, but it was overwhelming, whatever it happened to be. So I fragmented. I have to call it back. If we call ourselves back routinely, then we don't become used to the nature of being fragmented and call that normal, normalize that. It's not normal. Normal is being whole. We talk all these different ways about stepping into our wholeness. How do we step into our wholeness? What does that look like? It looks like calling ourselves back repeatedly, repeatedly. So we have a practice. I have a 4-step practice that I want to share with you, which is really easy. And that can be done every day, all the time, when we feel that maybe just life has taken on whatever it's taken on and has just maybe distracted us a bit. And we feel like I'm not fully here. When you're in your car and you're driving somewhere and you don't really remember how you got there, you're fragmented. You got there safely, thank God, because your system still has a lot of memory and you work on a lot of levels, but you're fragmented. Don't we want to go everywhere in bringing all of us, not just parts of us? Yes, we do, because our experience and our contribution and our capacity shows up when the whole of us is there. So the first step in this calling and reclaiming ourselves is a conscious intention to call our soul energy back. So this is done, as I mentioned, Lisa, this is done in ritual and ceremony often, but we can also do it through the repeating of mantra that it's my intention. So you can make up any kind of mantra that you want, but here's one that I'm going to put in the chat section, which is a nice one to keep in your, write it down and keep it on a little Post-it note. You know me and Post-it notes. I love Post-it notes. It's my intention to heal, to become whole, and to welcome my soul parts back to me now. Call them back. Just like you would call a dog that's run off, call them back. The second is to work with the body. And we're going to do that a little bit today with Siddhi, because the body is a record keeper of these situations. So your mind moves on, but your body has stored the experience of whatever is happening. And when something similar happens, then in that similar experience, you may recall some of the trauma, discord, fragmentation of what happened before, because your body has this fabulous little memory about all these things. So there are a couple of ways, several things that work really well in jolting that and realigning that body memory. One is breath work, which we do every week and we talk about constantly. Pranayama is getting ourselves realigned with our breath is one of the most, if not the most effective way of calling ourselves back. But when we do it with the intention of healing, not just like it's something I should do, but it has this result, then we hold it differently. The other is dancing. I mean, we talked about this last week, I think. Movement, dancing to a drum, to the drum beat. Put on Spotify, pick out the drumming music and just twirl around your living room or your bedroom or your whatever, because dancing moves it, and dance in ways, just let your body flow. It's not a choreographed dance. Excuse me. It's just movement. You're letting things flow out of you. And the third of this is moving vibrations through our body, which can happen with sound, which is why I said listening to some music. It's also all the beautiful sound healing that Lydia does. That's moving, that's taking the energy and breaking it up and putting it back together. It's letting your body find the frequency it wants to find. And vibrating, shaking the body. Another thing I think Siddhi might address today, that is a fabulous way to shake things out and let them come back into their accord. So it's deep work. And when we're doing this work, we want to be really reverent and in gratitude for our body's effort. Our body, mind, spirit is working all the time to keep us whole without us even knowing. It's on autopilot. It's on auto trying to do it. But sometimes it just gets overwhelmed by past circumstances, current circumstances, whatever is happening. And when we're in an attentive mood and an attentive place, we recognize it and we handle it sooner than later. Soothing mantras can be really helpful when we're doing this work, because if we are bringing up, and I'm going to put this one on also, if we're bringing up a past experience, if you are working with past experiences, not one that's just this week has been really rough, but something else, it can bring up a little sense of being unsafe, because I'm making myself go back into a memory that I don't really want to be in order to jog it loose. So one of the beautiful mantras and intentions is that I am safe. This work is safe. I'm supported. Healing is necessary. All is well. Reminding ourselves that this is our natural state of healing, that naturally we want to be healed. That's the call of our system. Our system doesn't say, I want to be in discord. It just doesn't always know how to heal. So it looks in all sorts of places. In the dysfunction, it looks in drugs and alcohol and sex and whatnot. And in healthy ways, it looks at pranayama and breathing and all the things we look at, but it's striving to become whole again. That's its natural tendency. Just like our deepest longing is to be expanded. This is inherently built into the soul essence of our being, is to be healthy. It's not trying to be sick. So using these mantras to support can be helpful. There's a book called Waking the Tiger, which is also, I don't know if any of you have heard about this. It's quite interesting around all of this. You might be interested. I'm going to put that down. And then I'm going to turn this over to Siddhi. And I'm just going to say that our wholeness is affected by our intention to be whole. And if we each set this as our intention, I know that we have many things that we are calling in our lives that have happened to us and around us and not necessarily have anything to do with it, but we're being affected by it. But we still have the responsibility to pick up the work, because no one else is going to do it on our behalf. And we have the right to be living in a healthy, integrated way. So this week, work on these mantras and maybe just watching yourself, looking at how it is that I'm holding some things that have been there either a long time or just repetitive patterns that are keeping me from being in my full, spontaneous, juicy nature.